What if the most radical spiritual rebellion in human history wasn't against gods, but against those who claim to speak for them? And what if the deity revealed to Akhenaten, Egypt's heretic pharaoh, wasn't a god at all, but a presence so alien, so formless, that no human eye was ever meant to see it? Today, we step into a silence older than time. We walk into temples whose walls no longer whisper, and into the desert where the Aten once gazed, a deity stripped from stone, erased from history, yet somehow still pulsing just beneath the surface. Because what if Akhenaten didn't merely shift Egypt's religion, but received a message from something not of this earth? Then everything we know about ancient gods, divinity, and even reality itself begins to tremble. Welcome, wanderer of the veils. This is the Enchanted Archive, a sanctuary of forgotten scriptures, inner awakening, and echoes buried beneath dust and deception. Here, history bends, truth flickers, and memory is never just memory. Breathe. Let the sands of the Nile settle within you, because our journey begins with a name even the stars remembered. Akhenaten, Tumtu. In the 14th century BCE, Egypt stood as the beating heart of the ancient world. Monumental temples crowned a land. Divine kings ruled with symbols older than the sun. And the gods, they were everywhere, etched into stone, sculpted in gold, whispered in ritual. But from the core of this cosmic machine, something cracked. A boy named Amenhotep IV, raised in the priesthood of Amun, groomed by empire versed in the pantheon, stood one day before the divine names and said, "No more." He lifted a chisel to the sacred inscriptions. He built cities where old gods were forbidden, and he abandoned even his own name. Amenhotep became Akhenaten, effective for the Aten, and Egypt would never be the same. But what was the Aten? Not a god of war, not a god of fertility, not a god with myth or memory. It was a disk, a glowing solar orb, radiant, faceless, with beams that stretched like fingers, reaching, touching, blessing. It didn't speak. It didn't punish. It simply illuminated. And yet, Akhenaten claimed, this was the one true deity, not just of Egypt, but of all existence. The priests were horrified. Worship without idols, without rituals, without temples cloaked in shadow? But Akhenaten answered not with debate. He answered with action. He abandoned Thebes. He carved a city into the desert, a city called Akhenaten, the horizon of the Aten. Temples without roofs, no priests, no hierarchies, only sky, only light. But what was this light? Was it a symbol of divine unity? Or was it something else? Because the Aten was never drawn with a face. And in the hymns, Akhenaten wrote, they don't whisper warmth, they hum with awe. We hear distance. You rise, and the earth is silenced in your presence. No one knows you're coming. None may look upon your radiance. Now, 𝗃𝗶𝗱𝗲𝗍. This wasn't poetry. It was warning. Ra warmed the earth. Horus defended it. But the Aten, it could not be bargained with. It was not emotional. It was not myth. It simply was a presence, a current, a consciousness that moved through the sun, but was not the sun itself. Some called it light. Others whispered, an eye. And then there was Akhenaten himself. Look at his statues, the elongated limbs, the narrow chest, the wide hips, the skull, curved, inhuman. Some say deformity. Others say design. What if his body was not a mistake, but a reflection of what he served? Not man, not God. Something in between. Was he chosen or reshaped? Ancient accounts don't describe Akhenaten as a worshipper. They describe him as instructed, not by voices, but by frequencies, by vision, by radiance. The Aten was not a being. It was a transmission. And Akhenaten, the receiver. After his death, the old priesthood moved quickly. They erased him, destroyed his image, abandoned his city. Because to them, Akhenaten was not just a heretic. He had opened something, a door, a signal, a silence they feared. And maybe they were right, because when Akhenaten vanished, so did the Aten. No successor, no temple, no prophecy, just light, withdrawing, waiting for a new vessel. In the next chapter, we follow that vessel deeper into the geometry of Akhenaten, into hymns carved in disappearing tongues, and into sky alignments lost to time. We'll ask, what did Akhenaten really see above him? And what did he bring back? Because this is not just the story of a king. This is the story of a message, forgotten by man, but not by the light that never left. But silence is never absence. What was erased from stone still hums beneath the sand. A name forgotten by men, but not by the light that once called it forth. Akhenaten's death silenced the temples, but not the echo. That echo still lingers, woven into geometry of a city that was never meant to survive. That city was Akhenaten, not a metaphor, not a symbol, but a fixed point in time and space, a lens carved into the earth, where once a year the sun rose between two cliffs, and something aligned, not ritual, not tradition, but transmission, because on that day, the desert itself became a mirror, and the mirror pulsed. They say Akhenaten built Akhenaten in a frenzy. No sacred blueprints, no ancestral plans, only vision, only geometry. Streets unfolded, not for men, but for light. Temples had no rooftops, because containment was forbidden. The Aten was not to be sculpted. It was to be felt. In the old religion, gods were sealed in shadowed chambers. But here, the god was everywhere, and no one was allowed to look directly, because the Aten was not just light. It was presence, and presence, raw and unfiltered, is unbearable. Akhenaten's hymns were not royal declarations. They were confessions. He does not speak like a king. He speaks like someone undone, someone who has seen too much. Though you are far, your rays touch the earth, and though no one knows your form, it is through the heart that you are seen. None, that is not devotion. That is surrender. And maybe warning, because in every verse there is awe, but also fear. Not fear of punishment, but fear of dissolving. To meet the Aten was not to kneel. It was to melt into something that didn't care for kingship, names, or even memory. A consciousness without myth, a voice without voice, a truth too radiant to translate. And Akhenaten, this strange, elongated figure, with his curved skull and narrow limbs, wasn't deforming Egypt. He was becoming something else, a mirror, a reflection of what he served. And beside him stood Nefertiti, not as an ornament, but as a balance, the feminine polarity of the same frequency. Two conductors, one current. They weren't ruling a kingdom. They were sustaining a signal. Modern mystics say light is a code. Ancient initiates believed the sun was not a source, but a filter, that beyond its glow was a deeper light, a message hidden in brilliance. Hermetic texts speak of the fire that does not burn. Gnostics warn of the light that blinds the archons. And in Akhenaten's temples, that light could not be caged, because it was never meant to be owned, only received. There are no statues of Aten in human form, only the disk and the rays, and some of those rays ended in tiny hands. But reaching for what? It is said that sound can open a gate, but light erases the wall itself. Maybe that's why the priests didn't argue. They obliterated. After Akhenaten died, the response was swift. Temples shattered, cities abandoned, his name scraped from the stone. But truth does not rot. And if Akhenaten made contact, if he became a vessel, then it never mattered whether the world remembered. The Aten remembers, because light does not ask for belief. It only needs a surface to strike. We often fear heretics, not because they lie, but because they've seen what we weren't meant to see. Maybe Akhenaten saw too much, and maybe that's why his story was sealed. But he left behind a question, one that refuses to die. If the Aten is not of this earth, then what was I speaking to? In the next chapter, we follow that question, not into tombs, but into geometry, not into myths, but into alignment, into the unnamed frequency that still trembles beneath the broken dust of Akhenaten, a city that once listened, and maybe still waits. The desert holds no memory, and yet it remembers, not in words, not in ruins, but in the way the stones still breathe when light strikes them, in the way silence bends, precisely where Akhenaten once walked. His temples are gone, his name nearly erased, but the shapes remain, and shapes do not lie, because geometry is the language before language, and Akhenaten, he spoke it fluently. Modern archaeologists call Akhenaten hastily built, irregular, asymmetrical. But mystics see something else. They see solstice-aligned angles, open courts shaped by phi ratios, foundations not built for gods, but for the sky. These were not mistakes. They were coordinates, and they whisper something unspeakable. Akhenaten wasn't building for people. He was building for contact. In sacred geometry, the triangle points to heaven. The circle evokes eternity. The spiral means emergence. Akhenaten used all three, not in ornament, but in structure. His city pulsed with mathematical reverence. It was a body, and the Aten was the mind. But if the Aten wasn't of earth, then these patterns weren't human prayers. They were receivers, stonework, not for beauty, but for alignment. Like crop circles before crop circles. When the light moved through them, something moved with it. Some say the Aten was symbolic, but symbols don't make civilizations forget how to write. And yet, under Akhenaten's rule, Egypt's most sacred script, its intricate hieroglyphs, became simplified, stripped of their divine multiplicity, compressed, as if the people themselves were being recalibrated, rewired, prepared. Light replaced language, sound replaced ceremony. The sacred became immediate. So we must ask, what kind of intelligence needs no intermediaries? What kind of God offers no stories, only exposure? There is a theory, rare, ridiculed, buried in obscure journals, that Akhenaten did not invent the Aten. He remembered it, that the glowing disk was not a symbol, but an interface, a transmission point, where something beyond time spoke, through light, across space, across dimension. The Hermetic corpus whispers of this. The sun is a door, and light is the traveler. Nay, no, ends. In the Book of Enoch, the watchers descend in flame, not metaphor, but luminescence. In the Vedas, the Devas arrive not from stars, but through vibrational gates of light and frequency. Was the Aten one of them, or all of them? A radiant commonality, seen through different lenses, described with different myths, experienced the same. And then there's the body. Akhenaten's skull, long, curved, his limbs strangely proportioned, his daughters carrying similar forms. Some say it's Marfan syndrome, a genetic disorder. But what if it wasn't mutation? What if it was adaptation, a reshaping of form, a tuning of nerves, a shift in geometry to better receive? He didn't want to appear divine. He wanted to mirror the source, and the source was not human. Perhaps that's why they had to erase him, not because he failed, but because he succeeded too much, because he didn't just pray. He picked up the receiver, and when he listened, something answered. But now, all that remains are scars, ruined temples, lost hymns, and geometry no one can explain. Yet every mystic recognizes, because contact never leaves without a trace. It alters the architecture of cities, of minds, of memory. So the question is not, did the Aten exist, but rather, did we ever stop hearing it? Maybe that's why some still stare into the sun, longer than they should, as if remembering, as if searching for something they once knew, but never learned. Because what if that something didn't speak in thunder or fire, but in silence, delivered through light, into a body ready to forget itself? So look again and ask, have you ever felt something stare back through the light? In the next chapter, we follow that radiance further, to those who carried it, to lineages erased, but not broken, to the hidden ones who never forgot. Because the Aten may not have vanished, it may have simply hid, waiting for another horizon, for another receiver, for a mind ready to remember. Maybe that mind is you. Light never truly disappears. It bends, it softens, it waits, and when those who once carried it are erased, the light does not mourn. It simply looks for another vessel. Once, Akhenaten was that vessel. But after his fall, the world wasn't ready. Not for gods without names. Not for a divinity with no temples. No idols. No voice. Ect radiation. So the message fled, not into fire, but into silence. And from that silence came secrecy. They called them heretics, dreamers, 𝗃𝗶𝗱𝗲𝗀, mystics. But they were something else. They were preservationists of the impossible. Because the Aten didn't vanish. It changed form. Its whispers surfaced long after Egypt buried it. Not in stone, but in symbol, in scripture, in shadow. In Gnostic Gospels, the true God becomes unknowable light, and the creator God of this world, a blind architect, oblivious to the radiance just beyond his illusion. In Hermetic texts, the divine is not a being. It is a luminous truth, a fire that does not burn, a sun that shines within. And in the mystery schools of Alexandria, one phrase survives centuries of silence. The face of the true source cannot be looked upon. Sound familiar? The Aten had not died. It had simply shifted. So the question is not where it went, but who carried it. Some say Akhenaten's bloodline ended. But memory doesn't need blood. Ideas, once glimpsed, do not die. They seed, through whispers, through geometry, through silence. In Syria and Anatolia, esoteric traditions spoke of the children of the disk, not born by genetics, but by perception. Initiates who felt the pull of an unseeable God, who dreamed not in words, but in patterns of light. They gathered beneath stars, in places of stillness, waiting for the geometry to align again. They weren't building empires. They were building remembrance. Even early Christian mystics, before dogma took the throne, sang of a light beyond the heavens, a source the angels could not name, but turned toward endlessly. In the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, light is not salvation. It is recognition. To see it is to remember your origin. To forget it is to remain asleep inside the illusion of form. Was the Aten an early echo of this same inner radiance? Not a sun god, but a cosmic mirror. Then came the erasures, councils, empires, doctrines of control, anything that pointed inward toward personal light, toward direct divine access, became dangerous, because a world that survives on obedience cannot tolerate a God that asks for nothing but attention. The Aten had to be buried, not because it wasn't real, but because it was too real, too accessible, too intimate, too silent, because light cannot be owned. It can only be met, but not all forgot. In alchemical texts, the sun is not just gold, but the soul of the cosmos, and the greatest work of alchemy, not turning metal to treasure, but awakening the inner sun. In the Kabbalistic tree of life, the sphere of 𝗃𝗶𝗱𝗲 sits at the center, a radiant node that links heaven and earth. In Taoist scrolls, the golden elixir is said to form in the heart when the spirit becomes still enough to reflect the original light. Different names, same presence, different maps, same destination. The Aten was everywhere, and yet no one could look upon it. So where did it go? It sank into temples buried beneath cities, into carved stones that only reveal themselves at certain angles, into words that mean nothing to the uninitiated, but ignite fire in those who remember. The Aten didn't disappear. It became a thread, woven through every esoteric tradition, a reminder, a code, a heartbeat of the unformed. Akhenaten was not a failure. He was a frequency spike, a surge of forbidden clarity in a world still addicted to the dark. But truth does not need time. It waits outside of it, and when the veil thins, when silence deepens, it returns, not as thunder, but as light, striking a mind quiet enough to receive it. In the final part of our journey, we turn not to history, but to you, because the light Akhenaten carried may not have ended with him. It may have simply gone underground to wait for someone like you to remember. So the question becomes, what happens when the Aten rises again? And this time, you dare to look. What if Akhenaten's journey didn't end in the desert? What if it continued, not in bloodlines or stone, but in something far more intimate? What if the Aten found a new temple, not of pillars or granite, but of mind? You feel it, don't you? That quiet tug, that familiar strangeness, a presence moving just behind your thoughts, a silence that's been with you for years, not threatening, just waiting, waiting for you to ask, what am I really seeing? When I see the light across centuries, those who glimpsed the Aten didn't give it a name. They called it many things. The one source, the unmanifested flame, the observer behind all eyes. Today we call it the higher self, the field, the witness, presence, dead. But none of these names are right, because the Aten is not a belief. It is not worshipped. It is remembered, like a dream that becomes clearer only when you stop trying to explain it. Look around. Across the planet, the same awakening pulses through seekers. The Gnostic speaks of archons, false rulers of illusion. The Hermetic whispers of form dissolving into truth. The quantum physicist says, all matter is vibration, and light is both wave and particle. They are not contradicting each other. They are orbiting the same radiant center, because all paths that lead inward eventually dissolve into light, and at the center of that light is not a god, not a name, not even you, only the awareness that watches. And maybe, just maybe, that was the Aten all along. In Tibetan mysticism, at the moment of death, a blinding radiance appears, the clear light, and the soul either merges with it or recoils. The Bardo Thodol says, "This light is your own mind. Recognize it, and you are free." No, 𝘃𝗶𝗱𝗲𝗀𝗃𝗃. Akhenaten didn't fear the light. He aligned with it. He built a life around it. He built a city for it. He let it look through him. And for that, he was erased, but not forgotten. Because every time someone turns inward and sees through the veil of form, the Aten remembers and begins to shine again. So now we stand at the same threshold he once crossed, a world where temples crumble, where religions unravel, where inner silence grows louder than outer noise, and in that silence, light returns, but this time it will not rise over pyramids. It will not descend from clouds. It will emerge through your gaze, through your stillness, through your surrender, because maybe you're not just watching this video. Maybe something is watching through you. And so, beloved traveler, we leave behind the name Akhenaten, not because he is gone, but because names are only needed until you realize you were never speaking to the god. The god was always speaking to you, and now you remember. You've just passed through 5 veils of forgotten memory. But this was never a documentary. It was an activation. So I ask you, what did the light say when you stopped trying to name it? What truth revealed itself that now can't be unseen? If something stirred in you, don't look away. Don't scroll. Don't explain it away. Sit with it. Let it burn. Let it bloom. And if you feel brave, if you know what I mean when I say remember, then write these words in the comments. I saw the light, and it remembered me. We'll be listening. So will the light.